Hi friends, welcome back to Learning Space. So this paper discussion pertains to paper number 3 and we will be discussing about the topics of geography, polity and art and culture. So starting with the question number 37, here the question pertains to Representation of People's Act 1951. There are certain sections which is given here. Now what is important is all these sections have been in the newspapers for quite some time. Given the season being an election season, you can actually expect some of the questions pertaining to the Indian elections. So this question, all of these sections have been in the news recently and all of them are correct, and what is important is we will be dealing about some of the representative section, some of the sections which is present in this particular Act of 1951 in one of our current affairs module pertaining to polity, which we will be having quite in some time. As I have told you, all of the above explanation pertaining to these sections are very correct. Section 126 pertains to displaying any election matter by means of television, which is actually curtailed during the period of 48 hours before the fixed hour of polling. And section 126A pertains to the conducting of exit polls and giving out their result. Section 151A that pertains to the conduct of by-poll elections. Moving on to the next question. Now this is about voting in Indian election. All these means of voting is completely valid with regard to Indian election. All of the above are correct. And with regard to voting in person, everybody knows about it. Everybody goes to the polling station, votes. And what about the other two things, which is voting in proxy and voting through postal ballot? Now these two are actually given with regard to the service voters. A classified service voter is even allowed to nominate a proxy, that is, someone can represent him and they can vote instead of this classified service voter. So this is actually meaning by proxy voting. Now this proxy voting is also in news with regard to voting in the case of NRIs. There has been recently a debate with regard to proxy voting with regard to NRI. So please keep that issue in mind as well. And with regard to ballot vote, again postal ballots is given for your service voters. So please keep that in mind. And moving on to the next issue, this pertains to the funds whichever is being given with regard to Consolidated Fund of India. So here please take a note of this point, that is money which is received through judicial deposits. That does not fall under Consolidated Fund of India. So the correct answer is 1, 2 and 3 only. Now this judicial deposits in the form of banking transaction, they actually fall under Public Accounts of India. So you have some of the deposits like Provident Fund deposits, judicial deposits, savings bank deposits, all of that will fall under the Public Account of India. What is that major difference between Consolidated Fund of India and Public Account of India? The thing is, if you have to draw money from CFI, which is the Consolidated Fund of India, you need parliamentary appropriation. You need appropriation bill to be passed in the parliament. So this can take place only through parliamentary sanction. Whereas what happens with the case of Public Account of India? Now here you do not need such a kind of appropriation from the parliamentary side. This can take place by just your executive action. That is the difference. Moving on to the next question, this question is about adjournment motion. Now what is to be noted is that this bill, this adjournment motion, that is actually a device that brings about censure. It brings about censure, which means this is an extraordinary device, which means that this particular device will actually question the government which is ruling at the center. What does this mean? This means it cannot be used by both the houses. Only the Lok Sabha can actually bring about an adjournment motion. Since it is bringing about a censure to the government, I am repeating the point, since it brings about a censure to the government, this device has not been given with the case of your Rajya Sabha house. And it raises a matter which is definite, factual, urgent, but it cannot raise a matter pertaining to a question of privilege, because you have a privilege motion for that. So why should you bring about adjournment motion when you have a separate motion for it? Why should you bring about adjournment motion for raising a question of privilege? So that is the point to be noted here. Second statement is wrong because of that. First statement is also wrong. Moving on to the third statement, it should not deal with any matter which is under the adjudication by court, but it should actually deal with a matter which is of recent occurrence, because of which the third statement is also wrong. So the correct option is D, none of the above. Please take a quick glance about the criteria with regard to adjournment motion. It should actually discuss about a matter of urgent public importance. It should not bring about more than one matter, and it should discuss a matter which is of recent occurrence. It should not raise a question of privilege, because it can be raised with a distinct privilege motion. When you have already a distinct privilege motion, why should you bring about adjournment motion? And adjudication by court, if some matter is under the court adjudication, then you should not raise the same with regard to adjournment motion, and you should not revive a discussion which has been already discussed in the same session. Moving on to the next question. Now this question pertains to municipal corporation and municipalities. The first statement is absolutely correct, because this thing can be formed or can be set up in the states or in the union territories only with the concerned act of the state legislature or through the parliament. So the first statement is absolutely correct. Moving on to the second statement, this pertains to notified area committee. So notified area committee is actually not a statutory body. So the second statement is actually wrong. So the correct answer is 1 only. Now let us analyze more about this notified area committee. Now this is actually established by a notification in the government gazette. Just because you are bringing up a committee through a notification, it is called as a notified area committee. The name itself is quite important here. Now its powers are almost equivalent to that of a municipality, but unlike the municipality, this is going to be an entirely nominated body. Therefore, it is not going to be an elected body, nor can you call it to be a statutory body. And let us move on to the next question. The next question pertains to township. So this type of urban government is established for a large public enterprises. Like for example, take the case of Bell. Now BHEL, take the case of Tiruchirappalli, you have a separate township for BHEL. So such kind of township is actually present for large public enterprises. So this form of township, form of urban government, it has got no elected members. So the second statement is correct, whereas when you take a look at the first statement, this is not established through an act of parliament. So the first statement is actually wrong. The correct answer is B2 only. And when you take a look at this particular township formation, this township, it is actually formed out of the members, or you can say the persons who are working within that particular public enterprise. So it is going to comprise of some sort of technical and non-technical staff and engineers who are working in that large public enterprises. Therefore, in fact, you can call this township as an extension of the bureaucratic structure which is present in that particular township. Nowhere the parliamentary intervention is going to come with regard to the township formation. So that is the mistake with regard to that particular question. Moving on to cabinet committee. So they are extra constitutional body, no doubt about it, because they are not mentioned in your constitution. The first statement is perfectly correct, whereas when you move to the second and the third statement, here there is a catch. Now just because it is named as cabinet committee, it does not mean it is going to be comprising entirely of cabinet minister. There can be some other ministers who are not a part of your cabinet minister present within the cabinet committee. So they comprise only cabinet minister is completely wrong statement. And again, it can be headed not just by your prime minister, but even by other important cabinet ministers. So the question actually asks about incorrect statements. So the correct answer should be B, 2 and 3. So here we have a quick definition with regard to cabinet committee. Now there can be two types of cabinet committee. One can be a standing committee, another can be ad hoc committee. What is very important is even other important ministers like your home minister, finance minister, even they can head some of the cabinet committee. But in case the prime minister is actually a member of one of those cabinet committee, eventually he invariably presides over the cabinet committee. They are an organizational device to actually reduce the workload of the cabinet. Moving on to the next important question. Here the question pertains to the 6th schedule of the constitution. So this is quite a simple question, provided that you don't mess up with the names of the AMTM states. So you have a set of 4 states, which is the AMTM states pertaining to the 6th schedule. So the correct answer is Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. And moving on to the next question, which pertains about the National Green Tribunal. So what is important here is that this NGT has got jurisprudence with regard to certain acts. You have it under the Water Act is completely under NGT. Environment Act, yes, it can legislate upon that matters as well. Public Liability Insurance Act is completely admittable, whereas when you take a look at the Wildlife Protection Act, now that does not fall under National Green Tribunal. Even Biological Diversity Act is completely under your NGT, but not the case with Wildlife Protection Act. So the correct answer is 1, 2, 3 and 4 only. And then moving on to some question pertaining to motions. So we have 3 types of motions which is given here. One is substantive motion, that is completely correct. What do you mean by a substantive motion? That it is a self-contained proposal, that it is a stand-alone proposal. Suppose even if you take that particular bill alone, it will have complete meaning to it. So when such a motion is actually passed, you call it to be a substantive motion. That is, I am repeating it again, it is a self-contained proposal. It is a stand-alone motion. Even when you take that particular motion alone, it gives complete meaning. Whereas, take the case of an amendment. Now, an amendment actually falls under a subsidiary motion. Why? That is because an amendment, if read alone without the original bill, then it will not give you complete meaning. So that is why you call it to be a subsidiary to the original bill. So first and the third statements are completely correct. Take a look at what happens with the case of the second motion, which is the substitute motion. Now, substitute motion is one such motion which actually substitutes the original motion completely. The point to be noted with regard to the question is that here it is given that it substitutes only a part of the original motion. The mistake, it actually lies with the word only a part of the original motion. The one thing that you need to remember here is that substitute motion completely substitutes the entire original motion. Now, this particular definition, that is when it seeks to modify or substitute only a part of the original motion, here we are actually referring to an amendment. So that is why the second statement is completely wrong. Now the question actually asks about the correct statements. So the option is 1 and 3 is actually correct. Now please take a look at the subsidiary motions that we have. We have 3 types of subsidiary motion which have already explained in the static modules of polity. We have ancillary motion, superseding motion and an amendment. So an amendment only tries to modify or substitute a part of the original motion. So please understand there is a minute difference between a substitute motion and the amendment. Moving on to the next question, this question pertains to parliamentary privileges. So this topic is always very important. So Article 102 and Article 191 of the Constitution, it actually talks about the disqualification of members, which also includes the terminology of office of profit. So it definitely does not talk about parliamentary privileges or the privileges of the state legislature. So the first statement is completely wrong. Whereas when you take a look at the second statement, parliamentary privileges, they are of course special rights. They are of course immunities and exemptions which are enjoyed by the members and the ministers of the two houses. But the catch is with the statement only. It is not only given to your members, it is not only given to your ministers. Therefore, the actual correct answer is neither 1 nor 2. Take a look at Article 105 that we have given here. Now, this particular parliamentary privileges, it also applies to your members. It also applies to the ministers in both the houses of the parliament. But apart from that, you have someone like your Attorney General. He can come to the parliament. He can take part in the proceedings of the parliament. So he can also be given the parliamentary privileges. Now, also Article 105 clearly mentions that it is given to those who ever take part in the proceedings of the House, or for those who ever are part of any committees of that particular House, and for all these members, for all these people, you can apply parliamentary privileges. So, this is the catch with regard to that question. Also, you need to take a look at one more statement, that is, what if the Prime Minister is not a member of both the houses of the Parliament? That can even be coming. So, that can even be a possible situation. Now, what happens here is, if the Prime Minister is not a part of both the houses of the Parliament, and suppose within a period of 6 months he is actually getting elected into the houses, then also even if your Prime Minister is not a part of the membership of both the houses, he will also enjoy parliamentary privileges, because he can take part in the proceedings of both the houses. So, what is to be noted is that for someone who is not a member also, for someone who is not a minister also, parliamentary privileges are applicable. So, there are some special situation that is mentioned in Article 105. That is, for those who are a part of the committee, for those who can take part in the proceedings of the House, even for them your parliamentary privileges is applicable. So, please take a note of that particular question. That question is actually a tricky question. And then moving on to mid-oceanic ridges. Now, mid-oceanic ridges, they are actually formed out of constructive plate boundaries. Now, mid-oceanic ridges, please take a look at this particular picture that we have. Now, these two plates are going to move in opposite direction, and this is an example of a divergent plate boundary, and out of that some amount of magma is going to come onto the surface. Now, this example of a mid-oceanic ridge is actually an example of constructive plate boundary. So, that is why the second statement is wrong. The first statement is perfectly correct. It is an example of active fissure type of eruption. And when you move on to the third statement, the volcanoes are actually very much active near the mid-oceanic ridges, but as you move away from the mid-oceanic ridge, the activeness, the amount of lava, the supply of lava will decrease with increase in distance. So, the third statement is also correct. The correct answer is C, 1 and 3. Now, take a look at this particular picture. Now, this picture suggests that once you are very much close to the mid-oceanic ridges, your volcanoes are very much active, because the magma chamber is completely filled up. But as and when you move away from the mid-oceanic ridges, what is happening? There is becoming more and more inactive nature of volcanoes. The volcanoes' supply of magma is very much decreasing. So, thereby the activeness of the volcanoes also decreases. Moving on to the next question. Now, this question again pertains to some form of volcanism. Now, when two convergent plates, they collide, what happens is, the subducted plate, after reaching the outer mantle, or you can say the subducted plate after reaching the upper mantle, they get melted. They need not reach up to the core, they need not reach up to the outer core, rather upon reaching the upper mantle itself, they will actually get melted, and this zone is referred to as the Benioff zone. And the second statement is completely correct. So, the correct answer is 2 only. And moving on to the explanation part, here when two convergent plates, they collide along this particular Benioff zone. What happens is, upon reaching your upper mantle in the zone of 100 kilometers or more, they will get melted, and thus magma gets formed. And again, the volcanoes of the island arcs of the coast of Asia are again formed due to this kind of subduction mechanism. And this question may look tricky, but it is actually quite simple. Now, this particular graph, it talks about precipitation, it talks about temperature. So, what is to be noted is that if you take a closer look at this particular bar graph that they have, then the columns, they actually represent the precipitation becoming a maxima during the winter conditions. So, in the case of winter, you are going to have a winter maxima. So, this very commonly it represents the Mediterranean climate. So, that is why this particular climatograph, it actually fits in towards the Mediterranean climate. Out of all the 4, this particular Mediterranean climate fits the particular graph in a better way. So that is why we marked it as Mediterranean climate. And then moving on to Walker-Sill. Now when you take about Walker-Sill, this is not a north-south circulation, rather it is going to be an east-west circulation. It is a zonal circulation, no doubt about it, but it is not going to move in a north-south direction, rather it is going to be an east to west circulation. Again, if you take a look at this particular statement of transporting the thermal energy from the equator to the higher latitudes, that is again quite controversial, because here for transporting the heat from the equator to the subtropics, from the equator to the subpolar or to the polar latitudes, you have what is known as the Hadley-Sill, Ferrel-Sill, and finally the Polar-Sill. So you have Hadley, Ferrel and Polar. So why should you talk about Walker-Sill there? Walker-Sill is more towards east to west circulation, please remember that. And trade winds definitely form an integral part of the Walker-Sill, no doubt about it. The strengthening of Walker-Sill is not actually an indicator of El Nino. When El Nino is actually getting formed, it will actually lead to a weakening of the Walker circulation. So which of the following is correct? Only 2 is the correct statement here. And then moving on to questions pertaining to dead zone. So dead zones have been in the news recently. Take a look at the very first statement. Dead zones are hypoxic in nature, meaning that they are going to be devoid of oxygen. That is completely true, because dead zones are actually zones wherein you have a lack of oxygen. Dead zones are actually quite reversible in nature, provided you remove the causative factor. Provided you reduce or eliminate that causative factor, that can revert back to its original good condition. So dead zones are actually reversible in nature. So that statement is also completely correct. And when you look at the third statement, both agricultural runoff and airborne nitrogen particulates are responsible for the formation of dead zone. So which of the above are incorrect? None of the above. So if you take a look at this particular editorial article, you will come to know about some of the causative factor which has led to the formation of dead zone. You have agricultural runoff, you have sewage, you have finally airborne nitrogen particles as well. So all that has been completely responsible for the formation of the dead zone. So as I've told you, all of the above are the correct statement. The question actually talks about the incorrect statement, so it should be none of the above. Moving on to the next question. This is about Otter Conservation Reserve. So this particular reserve has been identified in Karnataka, and this reserve is actually situated on the banks of the Tungabhadra. So the first statement is correct. Now smooth-coated otter, it is found almost in all of the subcontinent in India. So what is to be noted is that it is not an endemic species of the Karnataka region. So the second statement is wrong. And with regard to IUCN status, it is actually classified as a vulnerable species. So even the third statement is wrong. So the correct answer is 1 only. And please take a note of it. This particular reserve, which has been identified in Karnataka, it also passes through Hampi, which is a UNESCO heritage site. So please remember that point as well. And also very important is the fourth point. Now smooth-coated otter is actually classified under Schedule 2 as per your Wildlife Protection Act, and as per the IUCN, this particular species comes under the vulnerable list. And moving on to the next question. Now this one talks about some mountain ranges which is present in the Himachal ranges. Please understand, they are talking about the lesser Himalayas. They are not talking about the greater Himalayas, they are not talking about the outer Himalayas. So when you talk about the Himachal ranges, Pirpanjal, Dhauladhar and Mahabharat Lake range, all of that actually falls under Himachal ranges. So the correct answer is 1, 2 and 3, whereas when you take the Kailash range, it is actually present in the Trans-Himalayan zone. And moving on to the next question pertaining to syntaxial bends. Here Himalayan ranges, please understand, it take a southward bend on both the extremities, that is on both the western side as well as on the eastern side, it takes a quick south bend. So this bend is what you call as syntaxial bend. Now that is why the first statement is correct, whereas when you take the second statement, both the mountain peaks are actually quite interchanged. So the correct statement is 1 only. Whereas take a look at this particular map, the entire Himalayan ranges, they take a quick southward turn. So on the eastern side you have Namcha and on the western side you have Nanga Parbat. And moving on to the next question. Now this is a very interesting question. It talks about the geological divisions of the northern plain. So you have Babar and Terai coming up in this question. Now Babar, as you all know, it is a narrow belt which is lying next to your Shivaliks. So this statement is perfectly correct. Whereas when you take a look at the second and the third statement, now rivers which is actually descending from the Himalayas, of course they deposit their alluvial fans across the Babar belt. But what is important is thereby they does not make the area suitable for agriculture. That statement is wrong. It does not make the Babar region suitable for agriculture, because what you have in the Babar region, apart from this alluvial fan, you also have some pebbles, you also have some gravelly deposit, which makes it unfit for agriculture. Please remember, this particular Babar belt, it also consists of alluvial fan along with gravels and some unassorted sediments, which makes the Babar belt extremely pebbly in nature. So along with the alluvial fans, you also have some unassorted sediments like gravels, because of which the area becomes not suitable for agriculture and only trees with very large roots thrive in that particular belt. Let us take a look at that particular question again. Now the third statement, it talks about Terai region. Now Terai is a region wherein the rivers appear all over again. The rivers don't disappear, the rivers come up again in the Terai belt. So making the Terai a marshy region. So again the third statement is wrong. So the correct statement is A, 1 only. So moving on to the next question, this question pertains to the variety of Indian coal. So higher the carbon content, higher is the calorific value, that is completely correct. And Gondwana coal is considered to be a better variety of coal than when compared to the tertiary coal. So that is also correct. Whereas when you take this third statement, Singareni coal mines, here rats were not used for the detection of carbon monoxide. Rather, you have one particular type of bird which is called as the canary bird. So again here 1 and 2 is correct. And when you take a comparison of the Gondwana versus tertiary coal, which we have mentioned in module 3 of the Indian mineral topic, please take a relook of these particular slides. You will understand more about Gondwana and tertiary coal. And as I have mentioned to you, in Singareni mines, which is present in Kothagudam, you have one particular bird, which is the canaries, and because of the rapid breathing rate, because of the high metabolism of the canaries, once they inhale the carbon monoxide, they will die faster than your miners. And what happens because of that? As soon as they die, the miners, they will evacuate from that place. So this is the age-old technique, but right now we have some modern sensors to have replaced this particular canary bird as well. So let us move on to the next question. The next question pertains to the Peninsular river system. Non-perennial source of river, yes, absolutely correct. Rivers are in the matured stage in the Peninsular river system, again it is correct. There is a near absence of meander formation. Just because this river is not in a young stage, the rivers do not meander. So the third statement is also correct, but antecedent drainage. Now this one is actually a character of your Himalayan drainage system. So actually the correct answer should be 1, 2 and 3 only. Now what is this antecedent drainage system? Now once the rivers which have existed before the upliftment of mountains, you call that river system to be antecedent drainage. So all of the Himalayan river system like Indus, Sutlej, Ganga, Brahmaputra river system, all of them come under the category of antecedent drainage system. Whereas when you take the Peninsular river system, they form under the category of consequent drainage. That is, the rivers follow the general direction of a slope. That is, the rivers have actually formed and made their way after the formation of this particular landscape. Your peninsulas are very old in nature. So after the formation of the peninsulas only, you had the formation of the consequent rivers. So this river, it is actually forming as a consequent of the original landscape. So please understand that terminology. And then moving on to some of the Indus river system questions. Bias River, it actually originates near Rohtang Pass, and not just Bias River, even your Ravi River, it actually originates near Rohtang Pass. Now, Harike Barrage, it is the meeting point of Bias and Sutlej, no doubt about it. So, the correct answer is 1 and 3. But what happens with the Tain Dam is that Tain Dam, which is also known as the Ranjit Sagar Dam, that is present across the river Ravi. And as I have told you, river Ravi also originates somewhere near your Rohtang Pass. And Harike Barrage is actually a meeting point of both the Bias and the Sutlej river system. And now moving on to questions pertaining to art and culture. Now, Bokods are male monks who perform the dance form of Satriya. That is perfectly correct. Whereas when you take a look at the second statement, Gotipuas, they are not female temple dancers, rather they are boys who are dressed up in the form of female, they dance in the form of the female dancers. Please understand, Gotipuas are boys who are dressed up as female temple dancers. So, Gotipuas are not directly female temple dancers. Please keep that in mind. So, the correct answer is 1 only is correct. And when you move on to this particular explanation part, here you have Bokods, as I have told you, they are male performers and they dress up and dance the Satriya dance. Whereas when you take the Gotipuas, all of them are actually boys who dress up as girls or who dress up as the female counterpart. And moving on to the next question pertaining to Harappan culture. So, miniature vessels, they are not used to store grains. Miniature vessels are less than half an inch in size. So, how can they be used to store grains? So, that particular statement is wrong. And when you take about this perforated vessels, they are not defective pieces. Rather, they were used to strain liquor. So, this statement is again wrong. Please understand, this is definitely not considered to be a defective pieces which has emanated out of Harappan culture. And both plain pottery as well as wheel made pottery was present with regard to Harappan culture. So, actually both the third statement only is correct here. Please understand that both your first and the second statement are completely wrong. So, when you take a look at the pottery that has been used there, plain pottery, it has been used for household purposes, whereas your miniature vessels, they are generally less than half an inch in size and they were used mainly for decorative purposes. And even now they evoke awe because they are completely a masterpieces of art when it comes to the Harappan culture. And some of the potteries were perforated. They have some sort of large holes in the bottom and small holes all across the sides. Now, probably they might have used for straining liquor, but definitely they are not considered to be defective pieces. And then moving on to again a question pertaining to Harappan culture. Now, all of this, the social and personal hygiene, their brick and mortar construction, boat making technique, the fashion and cosmetics and metrology in three-dimensional volumes, all of this knowledge had been possessed by the Harappans. So, the correct answer is all of the above. Even cosmetics like cinnabar, that had been known to the Harappans. They were aware about lipstick, they were aware about eyeliners and so on. So, even fashion and cosmetics was very much known to your Harappans. Moving on to the next question, this is quite an interesting question. Please understand, Auroville is considered to be an international living experiment in human unity. Why so? Now, that is because people from a large number of countries, they thrive and survive in this particular community of Auroville, which is present in Pondicherry. So, this is considered by UNESCO as a living experiment of human unity. And when you look at the second statement, this is also considered to be an autonomous body under the Ministry of Human Resource Development. So, the correct answer is Auroville. And then moving on to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, recently 3 islands have been renamed. So, you have the set of Swaraj Dweep, you have Shahid Dweep and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Dweep. Take a look at this particular map. Only if you have a clear understanding of the location of these islands will you be able to answer that particular question. So, Havelock Island is actually the Swaraj Dweep, and then you have Neil Island, which is actually the Shahid Dweep, and finally you have Ross Island, which is the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Dweep. So, the correct answer is A, and this is the correct order of its north to south arrangement. And then moving on to the next question that we have. Now this question is quite interesting because on one side we are talking about some famous exponents of that particular dance, and on the other side you have the dance form. So Javeri sisters, they have been associated with Manipuri dance form, Kelucharan Mohapatra is with Odissi, Birju Maharaj is for Kathak. Even some of you might have heard about Birju Maharaj because he is a very famous exponent and he is very much present in Bollywood dances as well. So Birju Maharaj is with Kathak, and finally you have Rukmani Devi Arundel, wife of George Arundel, for Bharatanatyam. So the correct answer is 3, 2 and 1 and 4. And the last question pertains to Kalbelia. So when you take this particular dance, it is actually a folk dance form which is performed by the community of Rajasthan. And yes, of course, it replicates the movement of a snake, and you have this particular instrument, a wooden wind instrument, which is actually used to capture the snake, and this particular instrument is being used by the community of the Kalbelia dancers to actually perform the dance form of Kalbelia itself. So all of these statements, that actually refers to the dance form of Kalbelia. So that concludes this particular discussion. We have attached this particular key as well, and that concludes the discussion. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.